Hey there, it's Pastor Andy bringing you session number 4 of 40 Verses to Ignite Your Faith, a video series by Lori Short. Today, her points are mainly made out of the book of Esther, and she does and talks about something very interesting, not only from her life, but from our perspective as well. She talks about God's story. And we're still doing our story verses and our story videos, putting them out there on Facebook. And what we want to remind you about from the story in that particular program is how God's story and man's story are two completely different things. And that man's story is a lot easier to see than God's story. And she illustrates this in Esther and uses those terms as well. How we sometimes the expression goes, can't see the forest through the trees. But Esther was one that didn't see how God wanted to do some great things and amazing things through her. And God was aligning the two journals, the two stories, to make it something pretty awesome. Yeah, you can probably hear that. A little bit of thunder there. That was kind of a surprise, but I hope you'll enjoy this session, number 4 of 40 Verses to Ignite Your Faith.
We saw last week how we are part of a bigger story. And sometimes we don't even realize how big the story is that we are in. That is illustrated in the story of Esther. Esther's beginning, for those of you who don't know the story, she was actually an orphan. So we don't know what happened to her parents, but she was raised by her cousin, Mordecai, an older man. And so right away, her story was probably not exactly the one that she wanted. But Esther also happened to be very, very beautiful. And that is key to the story because she got swept up in this contest because the Persian king decided he didn't like his queen anymore and he was going to find a new one. And the way he was going to do this is bring all the beautiful maidens from all over the land, and they would come to the palace and undergo 6 months of beauty treatments and then parade themselves in front of the king, and he would choose one to be the next queen. It was actually the first recorded version of The Bachelor. You probably didn't know that. And so Esther is swept up in this contest because she is beautiful. And no one knows that she is also actually Jewish. So she gets swept up, and lo and behold, she gets the rose. She wins. She becomes queen of Persia. So now you have this orphan that grows up and becomes queen of the land. Now that is where the movies end, right? That's where the story usually ends. That's what happened to Jack and Rose in the Titanic. We never knew or would know what their relationship would actually be like. We just always see the end. But what Esther discovers is that her story has just begun. And that is so often the case with God's story in our life, where all of a sudden we discover that we thought we were in one story, but it was actually a whole different story altogether. And so this all happens in the first chapter of Esther. If you've read this in one of your Old Testament classes or at your churches, you know the story. The story continues, and there's a very bad man who has the king's ear. His name is Haman. And he decides that because Jews will not bow to the king and also to him, that something should be done with this. Now, the reason the Jews didn't bow is because they didn't bow to any human being. They only bowed to God. And so that's why they didn't bow to the king. And Haman didn't like this very much. And so he gets the king's ear, and the king's kind of really, honestly, he's a little bit of an imbecile. I'll just be honest. I mean, you just kind of track this guy, and he's like, oh, okay. And so Haman gets him to sign an edict that all the Jews are going to be annihilated. So now Esther knows nothing about this, but Mordecai finds out because he, of course, is Jewish too, and he begins fasting and praying, sackcloth and ashes, and she finds out that her father figure, her cousin, is doing this. So she sends messengers down there to find out what's going on. And so, of course, he tells her, Esther, this horrible plot is being developed, and you are the only one that can do something about this. Now, Esther argues with him, but I can't go to the king, because if I take initiative and go to the king and he doesn't want to see me, I die. That's the way it works. Women didn't have a lot of rights. No one did around the king. And so it's a terrifying, life-threatening thing that he's asking her to do. And then, Mordecai says the words. It's probably the most famous verse in all of Esther. Actually, we'll have it up on the screen. Esther, if you keep silent, relief and deliverance for the Jews will come from somewhere else. But who knows but that you have come to royal position for such a time as this. Here's what happens, you guys. All of a sudden, the microscope is pulled back. And Esther gets the big view of her life. And she realizes she's in a story that's much bigger than the one she thought. Seeing our lives in a broader context helps us realize we're part of a bigger story. We pull back and realize the story is much bigger, and we are a part of that story. But what we do affects that bigger story. And that's what Esther realizes when she gets to the palace. She is going to have to live and act in her present situation. And that's what we have to do in our lives. The story Esther was in was different than she initially thought. And sometimes the story we're in is different than we initially thought. One of the good things about getting older, and it's one of the only things about getting older, is that you can actually look back on your life and you begin to see that stories that you lived are much different and much bigger than you thought. And I want to tell you one of those stories this morning. I was actually dating this guy. He was a pastor. Now, this was before my first fiance. I was kind of a train wreck when it comes to relationships. I mean, it was just one breakup after another. I'm not kidding. And so this one, I had actually been set up with this guy. He was a pastor. And I mean, we fell madly in love. And I thought for sure this was it. And so we got this opportunity to go on a mission trip with Compassion to Haiti. And I thought, the story in my mind was, oh my gosh, this is so awesome. The two of us will be able to serve together, and we'll see what we're like in ministry together, and we're going to be partners, and we're going to be life partners. And that obviously was not the story at all that God had in mind. So we get to Haiti, and I meet this man. His name is Ephraim. He was a light in this dark, impoverished country. And any of you who have been to Haiti, you know how heartbreaking some of the scenes are. But he was a pastor, and he worked for Compassion, and we met and we got to know each other. And of course, when I got back from Haiti, my boyfriend and I broke up. And the story there is that actually while we were together, one of his best friends who we had double dated with, he was in the worship band with him. And if you guys can even believe it, at 42 years old, this guy dropped dead of a brain aneurysm, leaving a wife and 2 kids. It was heartbreaking. We literally cried and cried and cried all night long. And then I put him on a plane and I said goodbye. And to make a long story short, he ended up marrying her. But here's the thing. The whole reason that God had that trip happen was because of the relationship that I had with Ephraim. He became like a brother to me, and I ended up writing him and saying, I want to help you. You are such an amazing man. What can I do? And he said, well, actually, I'm trying to put my daughter through school right now. And I said, great, I would love to help you. So this next picture shows his family. He had a son and a daughter, and I helped put Taliana through school. And I thought to myself, that is a great story, but it's not done. Several years later, as you know, I moved to Santa Barbara, and I became a pastor at a church in Santa Barbara, but they didn't have a mission trip or a mission partner in Haiti, and I said, I know a guy. And so the pastor said, well, why don't you lead a trip this summer? So I got in touch with Ephraim, and I said, I'm going to bring a team down there. And that began a yearly trek from our church down to Haiti. And I took about 50 people at different times to Haiti, but there was one man that I took who was a doctor. He was a pediatrician in Santa Barbara. He still is. And do you know that his heart was so captured by Haiti? And this is him. He's so awesome. He's like a kid magnet down there. And I have to tell you that he, on his own, to this day, goes to Haiti 3 times a year and leads health clinics while he's down there. That is part of the story that God had in mind. But guess what, you guys? It's not over. So this wonderful thing is happening, but all the while, my friend Ephraim was praying for me. Gosh, the first guy, he thought we were going to get married. And then I said, oh no, Ephraim, we broke up. I'm praying for you, sister. God's going to bring you a husband. And then I got engaged. He was like, yay. And then I got unengaged. He was like, okay, I'm still praying for you, sister. And I'm like, Ephraim, 15 years this man prayed. And on the last mission trip that I took to Haiti with Ocean Hills, he got to meet a guy who had never been on a mission trip before, who came with me because we were dating. And do you know that at the end of the mission trip in Port-au-Prince, Haiti, I actually have a picture to document it, this man got down on one knee in front of the mission trip and proposed to me in Haiti. Yes, prayers work. Those people that are praying for you, it happened in his country. So, of course, we celebrated. But here's the great thing, you guys. So when we were getting married in Santa Barbara, one of the people that had been on the original mission trip, for her wedding gift to me, she flew Ephraim to Santa Barbara to our wedding. And he did a prayer and did communion and participated in our wedding in Santa Barbara. That is the story that God had in mind when I went with my boyfriend to Haiti. And I want to tell you something, you guys. You are in some stories right now, but God's stories are so much bigger than the stories we have in mind. Some of you are in the middle of your story, and you need to be reminded that your story isn't over. As you move into your discussion, be reminded of this truth.